Hello and welcome back. Thank you for joining us on another episode of Mental Health, the New Wealth. I am your host, Nikita Nicole, the Illuminist, and I am so excited that you decided to join us for yet another episode. We have been getting into relationships, feelings, and the different things that we experience related to mental health. Today, I wanted to discuss a topic that is very much so related to mental health. And if your mental health is gone unchecked for a certain period of time, you can experience the feelings and take the actions that we're going to discuss today. Considering that this topic was very heavy, I brought in a professional. I wanted to make sure that I gave this topic the light that it deserves and not take it at all lightly. So today, I have invited Takara Hudson of Cultivated Hearts, which is a licensed clinical social worker and counselor, to talk about suicide. A lot of people that suffer from mental health difficulties and disorders also suffer from thoughts of suicide on a regular basis. Me and Takara will discuss what suicide is, how it shows up in our lives, and what it may mean, and what you may need to do if you are having suicidal thoughts. This topic is not to be taken lightly because not dealing with this issue may mean life or death for yourself or your loved ones. So, as we break down the different facets of suicide, hopefully you're able to grasp something out of this episode that can help you uncover some hard to deal with feelings and maybe bring some attention to some things that you never noticed before. So, sit back, relax, and let's get into this episode. Before we get into this episode, let me say that I am not a licensed mental health professional nor a doctor, although I will host licensed professionals as guests from time to time. The mental health difficulties discussed on this podcast will come from extensive research, life experiences of myself and others, and are not to be taken as diagnosis, prescription, or cure to any health mental difficulties or disorders. If you are experiencing deep mental health difficulties of any kind and have lasted for any duration of time, please contact your local mental health professional for assistance with treatment. If you or someone you know is suffering with mental distress or thoughts of suicide, you are not alone. Please call the toll-free National Suicide Prevention Hotline, open 24/7 at 1-800-273-8255. Again, that is 1-800-273-8255. Now let's get into the episode. I'm so excited that you guys decided to join me on my first actual audio and video podcast of Mental Health, the New Wealth. So thank you for that. I am here with your girl, Takara Hudson. She is a licensed clinical social worker, and she has been in this field of mental health and clinical work for over 10 years. So we're going to definitely put some respect on her name. Thank you so much for being here today. How are you, my love?
I'm doing wonderful. I'm very glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much. So tell us a little bit about you, why you decided to get into clinical health, and just where you are today in this field.
Sure. So a little bit about me. As you said, my name is Takara Hudson. I'm a licensed clinical social worker here in the state of Georgia. I initially wasn't interested in social work or getting into mental health at all. When I initially went to school, I was pre-med, and that was my main focus for many years leading up to college. And once I got to college, I just started getting more exposure, being around other cultures and learning more about what was actually going on in the world. And it was really getting into that space that helped me to recognize, like, wow, there's a lot of barriers to people get into healthcare. Yeah. And so it started to challenge my motivations for being a doctor. And so one of my friends introduced me to social work. It was not on my radar because I'm like, they don't make enough money. That ain't even, you ain't speaking my language right now. Right. But it took me a little bit of time to get there. But once I got there, it was just a really great fit. And what I learned was that I really enjoy helping people with everyday issues everyday problems and how to make the most of their life in those spaces. And so I've been able to grow over my career, work with a lot of different people, a lot of different settings. And so, yeah, it's just kind of grown and developed over time. And I absolutely love it. Mental health education is a very big deal to me, especially with helping us to prevent things from getting worse, and helping us to have language to describe the things that we're facing on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you so much. And it was important that you said that, because a lot of people like to address things when it's like too far, and really kind of address it when it's an exacerbated problem, and not just focus on those little everyday tweaks that a lot of people don't look at, that can prevent issues later on. So I really appreciate you doing that work, and just helping out in that way. And it's so funny because we always tend to go for the bag. I'm not trying to do that. That don't make no money. You know what I mean? But you get so much more sometimes when you involve yourself in a cause greater than money. And you find that the money comes,
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And I found that in my journey in helping other people, they have absolutely helped me. So you're right. There's definitely things that I've been able to gain that you can't put a price tag on. So it's been a wonderful experience.
Great. Okay. So, girl, I had to call you in, okay, because it's time to talk about some real mental health difficulties and disorders. And, in general, I wanted to address a lot of parts of mental health that people find it hard to talk about and address. This topic, I research, I learn a lot and am learning a lot, but I'm not in school for this. You know what I'm saying? I just go off of what I know, what I experience, and what I know others are experiencing. So when Spirit put on my heart to talk about this topic, I was like, hold on, like, that's a little bit too deep. Like, so I was just like, well, who should I have talked to, help me talk about this, because I really don't know. And here you are. So I'm excited because today we're going to talk about the serious topic of suicide. And it is so prevalent and important to uncover this veil, because a lot of people go through thoughts or feelings of suicide. And you can't assume that just because you are, quote unquote, well, and you have never felt that before, that maybe you'll never feel that, or if you have done the work and kind of work through some of those things, that you'll never feel again. There's so many different ebbs and flows when it comes to emotions, and we just never know. So I wanted to bring in my big guns, help me to talk about this topic, because I know we can do it. So let's delve a little bit more into that, and let's talk about what exactly is suicide. What's suicide?
Yeah, that's a great place to start. And even to your point about starting a series on relationships, I actually think it's a great pair to this topic of suicide. And as we go throughout our conversation, I think people will be able to kind of pick up on why I say that. But suicide, and how I usually define it, is taking intentional steps to end your life. And so there's some words that in there that are pretty important, especially the intentional part. So like I've spent some time being a therapist, and in those spaces, I've had a lot of conversations with folks who say, you know what, I was overwhelmed at a point in my life. I took some pills, but I woke up the next day. I didn't really have any like adverse reactions. And so at that point, I say, that's considered a suicide attempt, because your intention, the intention that you had when you took the pills, were that you didn't want to live anymore. And so that's an important word that I like to include in this conversation about suicide, because intent matters when it comes to the decisions that we're making in this space. So yeah.
So what popped out to me when you said that, and when I think of suicide, I always think about some very like, harmful, or, like you said, intentional, deliberate, quick, ending to one's life. But when you gave me that definition, it kind of spoke to me more, because I know some people who are intentional in their actions to not have a long life. And it might not necessarily be quick.
Yep. Yep.
You know that you living a certain lifestyle, doing a certain thing for a certain amount of time is not going to produce a long, fulfilled life. So when you gave me
Absolutely.
that definition, it was like, damn, because to me, more people than not are almost committing suicide because you're very intentional about the things that you're doing and you know that they will not produce, longevity in life. Whether it is
Absolutely.
an addiction, alcoholism, whatever it is, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
That is just not conducive of healthy living. So, wow, when you gave me that definition, that was just like that kind of blew my mind because I was like, wow, a lot of people are more suicidal than you would think.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you highlighted that because one, when it comes to people of color, and because of the way that our lives are impacted by the cultural and things that are around us, our our suicidality doesn't look the same as our white counterparts. And so, because of those ebbs and flows and those nuances that impact our lives in very unique ways, it's important for us to understand that suicide is not a one size fits all. It doesn't all look the same, and
Right.
it occurs on a spectrum. So anything from that person who is actively, intentionally, um, consistently moving towards ending their lives, planning it out, right?
Hmm.
Versus a person who may be flirting with the idea of not being here. All of those people will occur on a continuum, a spectrum of suicide. So I think that makes it difficult to talk about sometimes too. And sometimes it makes it difficult for us to know where to place people because there are
Mm.
nuances that come with that particular experience.
When you said that spectrum being different with people of color, let's
Mm-hmm.
break that down. Let's talk about that because, you know, our emotions, how we deal with things, the things that we have to deal with in general based on
Mm-hmm.
our different color is different. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Um, so I would want to ask first, how do people become suicidal, but then kind of go into the difference and what that looks like for people of color.
Sure, sure. I'm actually, to answer that question, I'm going to zoom out and then I'm going to zoom back in. So,
Okay.
zooming out, when we look at just mental health in general, mental health occurs on a continuum. You have everything from your general, how do you take care of yourself on a day to day basis, personal hygiene, practicing boundaries, engaging in healthy, just personal practices. That's one end of the spectrum. We all have a responsibility to take care of our personal mental health. And then you have that end of the spectrum all the way to someone who has a chronic and persistent issue, to the point where they would qualify for having a diagnosis of a mental
Okay.
illness, right? And so when you get into that space, we're talking about bipolar and schizophrenia and major depression, depressive disorder. We're talking about symptoms that are occurring on a chronic basis that will qualify as being diagnosed. And so there's a spectrum here when it comes to
Mm-hmm.
mental health. And in the same way, right, there's a spectrum when it comes to suicide, as I just described a minute ago. When it comes to why we become suicidal, it is a word that I want to make sure that people like stick to and put in their back pocket is hopelessness.
Yeah.
A person who is suicidal is a person who has lost hope. A person who doesn't feel like there's anything that's going to change. A person who feels like there's no way out of what they're experiencing. And so that person comes to a conclusion many times that maybe it's not worth them being here. Maybe they're more of a burden of being here. And so hopeless is a really important word. And so when you take that word and you consider the things that contribute to people who look like us, um, being hopeless, right? Whether that's affordable health
Yeah.
care, being able to have access to resources of being able to take care of themselves, housing. You're talking about the basics that we need in
Right.
order to function on a day to day basis. And when that is too cumbersome for us, then we can easily slip into a place of hopelessness.
Yeah.
Chronic health issues, death in our families. These life experiences that are difficult in and of themselves, but are exponentially more difficult for us because they occur more frequently in our interactions. And so those things are adding to us feeling hopeless.
Yeah,
So those issues, the things that are attached to those issues, are contribute to that experience for us. And so when you look at how our society thinks about these things, or the fact that they don't think about them or don't even seem to care about them, then we have some issues. It creates barriers for professionals even to understand, people who
absolutely.
don't look like us, to understand, like, wow, this issue of getting dental care is contributing to their hopelessness. This issue of having adequate child care is contributing to their hopelessness. They don't know how to connect those dots many times, but for us, they are connected and they contribute to us being suicidal.
And that's important to understand, because those different facets, and I hate to say this, but just us as a culture in general have to do so much work in balancing that feeling of hopelessness,
Mm-hmm.
disparity, not feeling like we can get from up under,
Mm-hmm.
what we have been oppressed by. And it's not like this imaginary thing. This is something that we have to deal with on a regular basis, just the disproportionate lives that we have to live sometimes. And even if we are
Mm-hmm.
doing quote unquote well for ourselves, the pressure, to
Mm-hmm.
maintain that and to keep that up, and especially during this pandemic. So, like you were saying, even the hopelessness, and then coupled with a national pandemic, like
Mm-hmm.
that's major in itself. And it's it's interesting to see, from the psychological lens of what we have to go through versus our counterparts. you know
Right.
you'll go through certain levels of suicide, but them getting
Mm-hmm.
to that point might not look like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It might
absolutely.
be pressed by more different facets of maybe anxieties and pressures, but not
Mm-hmm.
so much hopelessness, disparity as we feel in our
Mm-hmm.
community. So that's very powerful. So now that we understand basically how that's connected, especially with people of color, how do people, or why, how and why do people become suicidal? I know you were saying the hopelessness,
Sure.
but like, is it to where a person just feels so down that they can't? Because I know, I'll use myself for an example, right?
Mm-hmm.
We all have bad days. I'll have maybe even a bad week, but there's something
Mm-hmm.
that clicks after that, that is like, okay, come on, sis, like, you've had a bad week. Let's dissect that.
Mm-hmm.
And just using some of the things that, I try to use to kind of break out of that.
Mm-hmm.
How does a person stay in that space that is not, I guess, diagnosed, like you said,
Mm-hmm.
as it being clinical?
Mm-hmm.
How does a person stay in that space to where, you start making actual actions to go ahead and carry things out?
Sure. I actually think an important thing that you said at the beginning of our time was you taking time to learn, right? And so learn and become aware of what's happening in when it comes to our mental and emotional health. That education is the number one prevention. It helps us to be aware of what the problems might be, when we should get some help, where we should go to get some help, or if we were to interact with a person, to know how to move a little bit better than a person who doesn't have that education. And so
Mhm.
when you look at a person who's experiencing trauma, you're experiencing just one thing after another. When there is an inability to effectively deal with the emotions and the experiences in our relationships on a day-to-day basis, those things add up. They become compounded. You think of like compounded interest, right? It grows
Mhm.
exponentially. And so it's the same thing with our experiences when we haven't resolved them. Even when you said the word dissect, that requires a level of intentionality to say, wait a minute, what's going on here? How do I need to move this around? Okay, this is what I need to do so I can keep moving forward. A lot of us don't have those
Right.
skills. And so when you keep adding on health issues, you add on family issues, you add on problems at the work, your job, your boss getting on your nerve, you're adding on all of these other things, and there's an inability to effectively address them. Then
Mhm.
yes, hopelessness can um, be an outcome of not being able to address those things effectively.
And especially when you said things happening back to back, we are praised for being a resilient people. You know,
Y'all so resilient, y'all be bouncing back. But it's like when we do, there's not a lot of work done. There's a lot of suppression. There's a lot of pushing
Mm-hmm.
down. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and to even have that moment, like you said, speaking of the word dissecting, having that moment to stop. A lot of us don't have that. I'm
Nope.
blessed. I'm so blessed to have that opportunity. I'm a single woman. I don't have any children. So I can
Mm-hmm.
take that time to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of us cannot. And it's almost a thing of, if you try to, now it's become almost trendy, mental health, get you a counselor, girl, go to, get in a group, things of this nature. But it's so much work that needs to be done now, that this needs to really become a lifestyle. This needs to become something that we're doing on a regular basis, and really just being able to say, you know what, this is a lot. This
Mm-hmm.
is a lot, and I'm going to take a break, or I need to take a break, regardless of whether I have a family,
Mm-hmm.
children, whatever. Me taking a break to make sure that I at least center myself, um, and kind of collect myself and get myself together, is beneficial for me being here for you all. And if I can't get that
Absolutely.
for myself, then I might not be able to be here in support of you guys, or be here at all. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but as you said, you have to have those tools. And so a
Mm-hmm.
lot of us growing up, learning the patterns of our parents, learning the patterns of our environment, we don't have the tools of communication, a lot
Mm-hmm.
of critical thinking. We have a lot of critical thinking, but not in the way of mental health and how to, dissect those parts. So let's talk about what a person should do if they become suicidal, or feel that they are, starting to have thoughts that they are not familiar with, that they want to kind of start. They feel like they should be better off not being here. What can a person do when they start feeling that way?
Yeah. You made so many great points. To the point of the generational impact, right? And I'm just gonna briefly segue into this statistic and then we'll come back. But when you look at the US Department of Health and Human Services, for the Office of Minority Health, 2019, suicide was the second leading cause for African Americans ages 15 to 24.
Wow.
Number two, this is 2019. This is before the height of the pandemic. And so we haven't even factored in what that looks like with this statistic.
Hmm.
That's major. There is a major generational impact that's happening there. Those are the individuals who are transitioning from under their parents, right? When you're 15, 16, 17, you're starting to make independent decisions. You're starting to go off to school. You're starting to think about what the future looks like. And if at that point you don't have those skills, if at that point conversations haven't been normalized, at that point you don't know what resources are available to you if and when you are backed into a corner, or you have a bad breakup, or your friends turn on you in some type of way, and you're experiencing some type of emotional distress, you're
Hmm.
already in trouble. You're already
Yeah.
in trouble. And so when we talk about the second leading cause, there is a major call for us to address our parenting skills and how we're approaching that, which we can come back to at a later point. But
Girl,
so
that's
there's
gonna
some
have to, we
layers
gonna
here.
have to run a whole another episode on those parenting skills, because that's our foundation. If we don't have that, and our culture in general is the most leading. As soon as you 18, you out of here. You ain't even
Mm-hmm.
like close to, you don't know nothing at 18,
Mm-mm.
and you're
Nope.
and you ready to get this person out of your house and off of your pocket. Like, you don't know
Mm-hmm.
anything at that age. So to actually throw someone basically to the wolves at that age, I can see how the age gap from 15 to 25 and suicide was that heavy, because you don't know what you're doing at that age. I'm just
No,
figuring it out, and I'm damn near 40.
that's
So,
facts 100%.
yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. But go
No,
ahead. I'm sorry.
no, 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 no. Yes to all of that, right? And so when we talk about, well, what do I do when I feel this way? The reason why I went there is because we have to consider our environment. If I've grown up in a home where it's okay for me to say I'm feeling this, I'm thinking this, and I have that emotional and mental support, then that person getting help looks different for a person who hasn't had that environment. That person who can go to a family member, go to a friend where some conversations have been had and some things have been normalized, then they can advocate for themselves. They can reach out for help and even prevent things from getting to the point where they are seriously suicidal, versus a person who may not have those outlets, right? You're really kind of like on the mercy of whatever the state or the government provides as far as resources for people who are in those spaces. In the state of Georgia, we have the Georgia Crisis and Access Line. And so actually the suicide prevention line links up to that line as well. So if you call the suicide prevention line, they all meet at the same place. But there are resources that are available. There's a crisis team that can come out, assess, provide resources, do a safety plan. I worked on that team for 7 years. So learned a lot in those spaces. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of children, adults, hospitals, communities. I've been in parking lots. I've been in anywhere you can think of where a person might be who is having a crisis. I've been there. And so that person is kind of at the mercy of what is available. And so if I am intentional about taking care of my mental health, or at the very least being aware of what resources are available to me from a local standpoint, then I'm in a great position to access that support if and when I get to a point where I'm not sure if I want to be here anymore. Many times it sneaks up. It's a gradual progression to a person getting to that point, right? Grandma passed away, and then my mama got sick, and then my daddy had cancer, right? And so there's this gradual thing that takes place. And so usually it's best for us when there is one occurrence to go ahead and start saying, okay, where am I at? What's going on? What do I need to do? So that compounded experience doesn't crush us at a later point in time.
This is just grow. We're definitely going to have more of these, because this is just, it's so much to unpack, and there's so many facets that, like you said, it looks different. It looks different for everybody. So basically, just to reiterate what you were saying, when a person is, feeling that way, to make sure that you kind of tell somebody and let someone know. But as you were saying that, let's speak to, and I'm just paraphrasing to make sure that I clarify for myself and then those others that are listening. If you do not have that support system, that structure to say, okay, I can help you, I'm a listening ear, I'm here for you, then you can just go ahead and call the suicide hotline, and they will give you assistance in that way.
Yep.
And are there levels to suicide? And what I mean by that is, this particular, or hypothetical person we're speaking of now wants help. You know what I mean? They maybe try a parent or try a loved one, and that didn't work. So they're willing, to call the hotline, because they really do kind of understand that maybe these thoughts are kind of unfamiliar, and they don't want to follow through, even though they're feeling like they should. They don't want to. Let's speak to the person that don't want to call, don't want to talk to nobody. There was this person that I knew, a close friend of mine. She said she had a coworker. She said the coworker was very sweet, always very kind. They were on lunch break or something like that. And he spoke to her, gave her a hug, they had their normal camaraderie conversation. And he left, and he killed himself on his lunch break, you know what I mean, at that time. So I guess let's speak to that, or at least shed some light on the person who might not feel like going through the channels to do that.
Sure. I mean, the truth of the matter is, you can't help a person who doesn't say something. If you're completely oblivious to what may be going on with a person, and then they don't say anything, you might not know. That person just might end up in a very unfortunate, a part of these statistics, right? That we talked about. Our loudest mode of communication is our actions, right? And so sometimes people might not verbalize what's going on with them, but they're acting strange. They're distant. People who tend to kind of disappear for periods of time and deal with whatever they're dealing with in isolation by themselves. Those are the people you want to check on. It's also the person, like the person who doesn't have a very strong support system, the person who um, who tends to just have a kind of negative even attitude towards life. Um, if people are selling their possessions, if they're writing letters, if they are suggesting things, and even if you're like, I don't know if that's suicide, it just sounds like somebody should
Yeah.
check on you, right? Sometimes we just get that gut feeling like, I think we need to see what else we might need to do because I'm concerned about you. Um, yeah, but if a person doesn't say anything, and for all intents and purposes, we're not around them enough
Mm-hmm.
to see those types of actions, then they may slip through the crack. To be honest, I think that's why I think when it comes to the topic of suicide, it's important for me to highlight it's a corporate experience. It's all of us, right? It's that coworker that may be like, he's missed a couple of days at work. She may not be close to him, but she's at least enough out of her own world that she can see that something else may be going on with somebody else, right? It may
Mm-hmm.
be that other people who are around that may not be the closest person to those folks who are able to pick up on some things that may be concerning. And so that's why when it comes to suicide prevention, it's not just about the person who's experiencing the suicidal thoughts. It's about
Right.
everybody else being aware of what that is and what that looks like and knowing what those resources are and having that awareness and insight to be able to intervene in those situations where that person may not have a support system that would be helpful.
And that's very true because when you said that, I thought about, a lot of times, everybody is woke, we woke, but it's just like, it's very important to be spiritually in tune. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean?
Mm-hmm.
To do enough of the work to be balanced enough to where you have um emotional centers that are feeling of others.
Mm-hmm.
You can check the room, you can check the vibe. Somebody might not necessarily say, girl, today was real hard. But if you notice a shift, like you were saying, like if you
Mm-hmm.
notice, or sometimes you might not even notice anything, but if you're quiet and you've worked on your spirit enough, your
Mm-hmm.
spirit will be like, something ain't right with that person. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you
Mm-hmm.
might not need to necessarily be on their business or, but just a stern hug, a strong hug and a look in the eye, like, how you doing today? You okay?
Mm-hmm.
And we take those things for granted. We kind of,
Yeah.
how you doing? And do it in passing, never really waiting for the answer or the response.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and really just working on being a kind person. I'm not saying being necessarily nice.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not nice. I'm not. I'm not because it's not for someone else, but I'm a kind individual. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
and it's about being kind. It's about speaking. It's
Mm-hmm.
about complimenting.
Mm-hmm.
And I was telling my friend that the other day, just something small. And not to say that you complimenting on someone's appearance or, you making a mention on how polite someone is, that might be something little to you, but that
Mm-hmm.
might be major to somebody who feels like they shouldn't even be here.
Yeah.
That's letting them know, even just off of, I just love your personality. You're so polite. You're so beautiful. I love, your outfit. I love your, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
These things can sometimes indirectly talk people off the ledge, so to speak. Go
I'm a
ahead.
huge advocate for kindness. I think for many reasons. My personal spiritual beliefs, the things that I've seen in my career, and how far kindness goes. Because you don't know what's going on with a person, and sometimes people tell us, and we still don't know because we don't listen very well, and we don't have good communication skills. And when you consider like our environment where we spend so much time in our phones, we're so much in our own world. It's all about what we have to do. We're in a rush. We're hurrying, going over here we don't slow down enough. And there were two words that you said earlier that clicked with me when you talked about taking a break, so pausing, resting, and the word lifestyle. And those are things that I speak to my clients about creating a lifestyle of rest and a lifestyle of pause. Whether you got 17 kids or you don't have any, whether you got 12 jobs or you only got one, it doesn't matter. Having a way of consistently slowing down and saying, what's going on with me? What's going on around me? How do I stay
Mm-hmm.
connected? Right? Because we disconnect very easily. I could be on my phone 45 minutes playing Candy Crush, and I'm always stuck on a level, and they drive me nuts. Right, so it's easy to it's easy to be in our own world. And so we have to intentionally resist that desire, right? Because culture is going to drag us into our own little bubbles. We have to intentionally resist that by being connected. And that could be as easy as you said, somebody walks by, you're like, girl, you wearing that dress? That's cute. I really like that color on you, or whatever. Like, staying connected with the things that are happening around us helps us to be able to be available to support a person who might be going through something. And so a lot of us are unavailable, right? And so we're not able to help as much as we could.
What's up, my mental health, the New Wealth family? It's your girl, Nikita Nicole, the Illuminist. And have you heard about Anchor by Spotify? It's the easiest way to make a fire podcast with everything you need in one place. Let me explain. On Anchor, you have tools to record and edit your podcast on your phone or computer. The great podcast that you create can be heard on Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, and more. It's all that you need in one place. So go to your app store and download Anchor, or go to anchor.fm and get started. That's anchor.fm. And let's get this going. I'm ready to hear an amazing podcast. Tell them Nikita Nicole of Mental Health, the New Wealth sent you.
We are talking about how suicide affects us and how, it affects us in our everyday lives. But I really want to kind of talk about how suicide is connected with mental health, because they're one and the same, but they're separate. You know what I mean? And you were talking about the different levels of being clinical. So let's shed some light on, how is it connected to mental health? And then how does that look for you? How are you treated for that?
Great question. All right. So yes, when it comes to mental health and its connection to suicide, I think many of the things that we've been having a conversation about today help to shape that for us. When we talk about everyday life, and I think part of what makes the connection between suicide and mental health may be hard for some people is that we really don't know what mental health is. We hear it, we see it, we're like, okay, that, it's trendy. Like you said, sometimes it's like, oh, I'm going to move this certain type of way because it's popular. But what do we mean when we say mental health? And one of my favorite ways of kind of teasing that out is talking about our physical health. If we're honest, we don't do really great in that space either. But when it comes to our physical health, we know that if you don't brush your teeth, you're gonna have some dental issues, right? You know that if you don't take a bath, you could get an infection. If you don't wipe yourself well, right? Like, you're gonna have some issues there. If you don't take care of your physical body, then you're going to have some issues. It may not be tomorrow, it may not be in 2 weeks, it might be in 20, 30 years. But eventually, and what I tell my clients is your body tells on you. Your body will tell you, I ain't been getting treated right. It ain't okay. I'm not okay. Yeah. Right. And so when it comes to our physical health, if we think about that similarly to our mental health, like, there's a need for us to have maintenance. How I describe it to some of my clients is having a therapeutic rhythm. We need a routine, right? We need a way of saying, okay, if boundaries are a huge part of that, right? How we interact in our relationships. Taking that time to pause and to rest and to reflect and to ask ourselves difficult questions, right? Or to ask other people difficult questions. If our lives are plagued with avoidance, right? We avoiding people, we avoiding problems, we avoiding having conversations, then we don't get to grow, right? And so having a way of taking care of ourselves and being introspective helps us to be able to be preventative and pay attention to what's happening with us so that we can advocate for ourselves or ask for help or be intentional when we do find that we're in trouble. So all of those, so mental health. And when we talk about suicide, you can think of it as a symptom. It's a symptom of us not being able to take care of ourselves from a mental health standpoint. So if I don't have skills to effectively communicate and I spend my whole life, my adult life, not saying anything that I need, just taking it, minimizing things that really bother me, being involved in relationships that aren't mutually beneficial. I don't feel seen, I don't feel heard, I don't feel loved. Then you may find yourself in a situation where you may not want to be here anymore.
Right.
So really, we can look at suicide as a symptom of us not being able to adequately care for our mental health. And for some people, they have a condition and they need medication that helps them. They need therapy that may help them. There's a lot of different interventions that may help in that space, but it's a symptom. Just like you could say for physical health, diabetes. For physical health, you could, right? Like similarly, if I'm not taking care, eating well and exercising well and taking care of my body, then I'm going to develop some type of condition. And if right, and so that's one way to kind of shape that mental health and suicide connection.
That's perfect. And it puts it in great relation, because like you said, it's the almost like the last step before it goes really bad. Like you said, when you're not caring for yourself, it will tell on you in that way. When you are diagnosed and you do go and they tell you that you have are diagnosed with suicide. Is it diagnosed with suicide, or what is it?
It's like a symptom. It usually hangs out with depression. Anxiety can hang out over there too. And so it's an experience. It's not like a diagnosis, but it's commonly associated with depression, and it can be associated with anxiety.
So since you said it in that way, now it's really helping me to understand, and maybe can help the viewers and the people who hear this later on too. On Mental Health and New Wealth, we talk a lot about vibrations and calibrating your vibrations and who you're around and what you surround yourself with, what you listen to, what are you feeding yourself? And like you were saying, so far as your physical, what you are feeding yourself. You can't say that you want to be in optimal health and you're not feeding yourself like food, So in turn, when you said that, it kind of rung true, because like you said, anxiety, depression, these things are the friends or the things that accompany suicide. You're not really going to have those feelings of suicide if it's not accompanied with one of those things. Or, like you said, hopelessness, disparity, these lower level vibrations. And so it's very important, like you said, the routines that we have, you know what I mean? Just those things of maybe you take baths on Sunday. And you put your Epsom salt in there, you get your music right, or you clean your home, I remember, OGs used to be like, cleanliness is next to godliness. But I noticed that your cleanliness is directly related to your mental, your mind space. I noticed a lot of people that, I went over or we kicked it and they, wasn't as tidy. Their mind was kind of all over the place. And even with me, as an example, I noticed when I start allowing my space to get a little more cluttered than normal, I'm like, oh, okay, what's going on? Because I can't properly process things if things are not in order in my physical space. As above, so below. So, spiritually, emotionally, whatever you have going on in those realms, they manifest into the physical world. And then go on into, like you said, those facets of lower level energies that accompany things that might direct in you feeling suicidal. So that was something that I really want people to take away, is to make sure you develop a routine that is healthy for you. And if you do have family and you do have, things that you uphold on a regular basis, a part of that, like you said, exerting those boundaries. This is my time to do this. I will not be disturbed in doing this. This is how long I'm going to do it, and do not give that up for nothing in the world, because damn near your life depends on it. You need it to calibrate yourself for the rest of the week. I like to do things on Sunday, because to me that's like the first day of the week, Sunday, and then do another midweek check Wednesday. So those are the days for me that I really hone in on self-care. But I encourage everyone that is listening to really write down some things that really make you feel good, whether it's not doing nothing at all. I think there's so much pressure on being a high achieving, like you always got to be moving and shaking, especially in this now this pandemic space where everybody is getting it out the mud, everybody is entrepreneurial. Hey, do you got some cryptos? No, I don't.
Yeah.
Every time I try to learn about it, it stresses me out. So when when it's time for me to do these things, I will. You know what I mean? And just
Yeah.
learning that you don't have to be everything for everybody all at once. A lot
Yeah.
of people, is pouring into other people's cup with the misconception that if you have, some water in your cup that you are able to pour. No, ma'am. Your cup
Mm.
needs to be full for
Mm-hmm.
yourself and
Mm-hmm.
overflowing.
Yeah.
If your cup is not overflowing, you have no business and no space pouring into nobody else's cup. It's not
Yeah.
okay to just have a full cup, because if I pour
Mm-hmm.
into you and I only got a full cup, then I'm left with half. You know,
Absolutely.
and
And
so
I
just
think
really, oh, go ahead.
I'm I was just going to say that entrepreneur part that you mentioned is huge. And even to bring some personal transparency to the conversation, right in the middle of the pandemic, I transitioned to being in my private practice full time. And it was great, all the things that people love about being an entrepreneur. You set your own schedule, blah, 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 blah. But the pressure of that on top of what's
Mm-hmm,
happening in the world, it led me to go back to the workforce. I
mm-hmm,
literally am about to start a job going back. I still have my practice and doing some things part time, but I had to do that. And then I had to communicate that to my clients. I said, listen, we spend time talking about mental health all the time. And for my personal mental health, this is the decision that I had to make. Right. And
yeah,
so it's different for each person. Maybe you just was at a terrible job. Maybe you stayed too long. You should have went a long time ago. And so there's some personal responsibility and accountability that come into that space as well. But it's different for each person. And when you talk
mm-hmm.
about taking care of yourself, it doesn't have to be elaborate. It doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be over the top. It's probably something you shouldn't be posting all the time anyway, because if you're active, if you're present with what's going on with what you're doing, then you don't have time to post it.
Say
Right.
that
And
again.
so,
Say that again. Because people don't, you know, you know, say that again because people don't understand. And like you said earlier about being present and available. Like you can't be available if you're trying to get the shot right, or you got to post your food every time. It's just like you can't be really in that moment if
right.
you're making sure it's a postable thing. And we live in
Yeah.
that society that, oh, like if you didn't post it, it didn't happen. Like, no, it's
Mm-hmm.
happening. And I'm living well
Mm-hmm.
and I'm taking care of myself. And I don't have to post it online to make sure that you know it.
Absolutely. And even to add to that as well, um, being sensitive to what season you're in. And I think sometimes we're stressed and we're overwhelmed and we're tired, and we're stretched too thin because we're not sensitive to what season, what do I need to be doing now? Right? What sometimes our relationships have ended and we need to move on. Sometimes those jobs have ended and we need to move on. Sometimes things need to change in our lives. And when we don't have the skills, right, to
Mhm.
effectively deal with life changes, then we're fearful of doing something different. You may be the only person in your house that has a self-care routine. You may be the only person in your house, listening to your playlist while you painting your toes. You might be the only person in your house doing that. But being sensitive to your personal needs and taking care of those things, regardless of what other people see or don't see, or regardless of if they agree or don't agree with what's going on. And so being sensitive to that, right? There was a time period when I needed to be an entrepreneur, learned a ton, amazing, amazing experience. Then there was a time for that to change. And I had to be be aware, be attentive, be present to what was changing in my personal life to say, hey, there's somewhere else that I can serve. There's somewhere else that I could take what I've learned and share this in the community in a specific type of way. And when we aren't attentive and responsive in those spaces, we're not just the only ones that's missing out, but the other people that should benefit from what we're doing
Yes.
are also missing out.
Yes, I just really appreciate you shedding a lot of light. You gave me some game. Okay. I'm new in the mental health space and I did not know that April, y'all, is mental health or alcohol awareness for mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't
Mm-hmm.
know that. So I mean, wow, it's just something for everything. So I need to do some more research so I can be up on that. But let's talk about how our crutches, our vices, the things that we
Mm.
do. Because when you told me that, I was like, for real? It was so crazy because now I really don't like drink hardly at all no more, right? But there was a
Mm-hmm.
time when it was just social. And then it got more than social. And then it was
Yeah.
just like, oh, sis got to have a drink every day after work because, woo, it was a long day. But if it's
Mm-hmm.
a long day every day and you drinking every day and you clearing out a bottle every day, starts to look at
Mm-hmm.
that trash can like, damn, that's a lot of bottles. Like,
And
you
your
know,
pocket.
right, exactly. So it's like these things, these crutches creep up on you because you're not doing the work to fill them with something. You have to fill it
Yeah.
with something. You have to. So either you fill it with meditation, rest, like you said, a good self-care routine, or maybe you
Mm-hmm.
might fill it with alcoholism, sex, or other addictions. So let's talk
Mm-hmm.
about how alcoholism in general affects suicide.
Woo, woo. Yes, let's talk about it. So I think, and it's interesting because even from the academia side, mental health and substance use are treated separately. It's really odd. Like I had to take electives in substance use. It wasn't something that was like built into the core of my mental
Really?
health. Yeah, it was not. It was not. I don't. I mean, I graduated some time ago. I don't know if that has changed.
Mm-hmm.
But for me personally, both of my degrees, it was not a part of that experience. Now, when I got into the clinical side, and my experience allowed for me to learn a lot, but that was like in the streets. That wasn't,
Right.
in school. And so, so for even for many professionals, they may not be as in tune with the fact that those things are connected. Many times, to your point, when we don't have those routines in place, we don't have that awareness in place, we're turning to something. Alcohol is legal, if you're 21 or older, but clearly it's not a difficult thing to get access to if you're under
Right.
21. Nobody's gonna, stop you if you walk out of the liquor store with 12 bottles. Like, it might be like, oh, you about to turn up this weekend. It's not illegal to do that. It's very accessible. And so that makes it difficult. And even to the cultural aspect that you shared, it's very socially, even the term social drinking is a thing because of how our culture is set up. And so,
Mm-hmm.
when we look at how we're using alcohol, that's the thing. What are we using it to do, or what are we using it to not do? Do I have to drink alcohol to go to sleep at night? That's a
Mm-hmm.
problem. Do
Mm-hmm.
I have to use alcohol in order to feel like I fit in and can vibe and and be myself around other
Uh-huh.
people? That's something to look into. Do I turn to alcohol because I want to forget things? I just want to be numb. I don't want to feel the things that I feel when I'm sober. That's something to look into. Now, if it's your 50th birthday party, and or if it's a wedding and you got an open bar because you're having a good time, okay, great. That's different than how a person may be using that if they're experiencing distress and they're
Yeah.
using that in order to cope with that. That is an important question to ask. Why am I drinking right now? What am I
Okay.
trying to do, or what is it that I'm trying to escape by taking this drink? Right. And so, not just why we're drinking, but how much, right? Like, some people are binge drinkers and they'll just go for it. They don't drink every day, but when
And
they
way
drink too
past
much.
the limit. Like you knew drinks ago that you was past your limit. Like, yeah.
Past your limit, right? What are you engaging with when you are intoxicated, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are you blacking out? Are you finding yourself in situations that are unsafe, putting yourself at risk? Are you driving, right? Are you putting yourself in situations and other people in situations where there's some safety concern? That's
Yeah.
important to consider. And for some people, when you take a self-evaluation, you may decide that's not really my thing. Like, I get that other people might do it, but that's not good for me because I know how I use alcohol or what my history have been or my family history. So an important thing about alcoholism too is that there is a genetic environmental component that can contribute to your how you use alcohol, and what that looks like for you. And so if your parents, if you, I mean, you got close family members who you probably just don't want to pick it up.
Shouldn't do it, like steer clear. And I had addiction very heavily in my family, with regular drugs and alcoholism. And I just always grew up never wanting to have anything to have more control over me than I did of it. So it was like it was years that I, smoked, marijuana, is drunk and everything like that. But when it got to the point where I'm like, okay, this is starting to become something that I feel like I must do, then I was just like, I don't want to participate in it like that. So, and I thank God that I was strong enough to like cut cold turkey in those circumstances. A lot of times people are not able to do that. And it was just really more so I listen to my body and how I feel, and once I start feeling worse, than what I wanted to feel, then this is not helping. Me drinking to this level is not helping. Me smoking to this level is not helping. It's not making me feel alive and vibrant. So it's something that I need to discontinue. And then so that's also, important for people to understand it. Just use your body as a gauge. I'm not saying that you have to live this stoic life and do nothing, but try to develop better habits with crutches, because when you deal with spirits and things of that nature, it allows you to be able to be susceptible to different vibrations, energies that are a lot of times lower. You're not getting higher, you're getting lower. And even if you are participating or taking something that is a upper, your cognitive skills and the things that you need to function on a regular basis and be reasonable about things, a lot of times are altered and impaired.
Absolutely.
So yeah, it's really important to do that. What else do you have to give us, or any nuggets that we didn't cover regarding suicide that you really feel is important for us to know?
Yes, let me pull out my little nugget sheet right now.
Okay.
I like to leave people with something they can do. And some of this will be kind of summarizing some of the things that we talked about, but I want to make sure that folks really kind of are hearing what's going on. Normalizing mental health and mental health treatment in our daily conversations is a very active and practical way that we can help prevent suicide. Very, very, very practical. And so if you start where you're at, you start with your circle, you start with your friends, you start with your sphere of influence, to start having these conversations and normalizing will help people to not feel shame in reaching out, because that is what silences people. The shame. I don't want you to think I'm crazy. I don't know what's going to happen. The fear and the shame that's associated with suicide really is what allows for people to continue to suffer in silence. So the more out loud you are, the more comfortable you are, then it helps other people to see you as an ally, to see you as a support, to see you as someone that can help get them to where they may need to get to if they're in trouble. We talked about parenting practices in general. I definitely think there's a lot to be said.
That's going to be a whole one by itself. Yes,
it is. But one thing that I do want to attach to that is this. What I tell people as far as parents, the best thing that you can do as a parent in preventing suicide with your youth, especially if they fall in these categories, is to take care of yourself. Because when you take care of yourself, you're dealing with the generational things that you're bringing to your parents in. You're dealing with the communication issues that you're teaching your children to do. You're able to be more aware and intentional and attentive to Johnny. Little Johnny might be acting out because he got something else going on. It may not just be hormones. It may not just be, teenage, whatever. It may be that Johnny got some things going on. And if we're not attentive with ourselves, then we don't know how to do that and demonstrate that for our children. And so and if you're someone who doesn't have kids, then as an auntie, as an uncle, as a sister, as a brother, you can absolutely do that as well. Boundaries are huge. Boundaries are huge when it comes to suicide, because usually what leads to that despair, that leads to that point where people are like, I don't want to live anymore, is because they've been disappointed in life. And when we've been disappointed in life, it's because we have had expectations. And when we haven't dealt with what is causing us to have certain expectations in our relationships, then we may find that I haven't practiced good boundaries. So my despair has been fed from my disappointment. That is the result of me not having good boundaries in place. because of these expectations that are telling on me in that space. So major there. And I think also for especially if there's any of our white brothers and sisters that may listen to this, it's important for you to know what's up too. Like, we need to know what's up as far as people of color. What is it looking like in our communities? But as a friend and family and colleague and co-worker of people who don't look like you, being aware of what's going on there in their communities and how it's impacting them is important as well. I think that sometimes we can exclude them out of the conversation, and sometimes we feel like, well, we don't want to have to keep teaching them how to support us. But the truth of the matter is, we might have to sometimes. We may have to repeat ourselves sometimes. We may have to say, hey, John, Bobby, this is what I need from you in this situation, because they may just very well not know. And so, yeah, those are kind of the things that I wrote down to make sure that I put out there for people to remember.
Well, thank you so much for your nuggets, and we definitely will have you back. You're stuck with us. You're not going nowhere. You are a part of the Mental Health, the New Wealth. Once again, this is Takara Hudson with Cultivated Hearts. Let the people know how they can contact you, how they can find you and utilize your services.
Absolutely. So every Monday at 8:30 p.m., we go on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube Live, what we call Mental Health Monday. So we take a topic kind of similar to this a little bit, and we kind of tease it out. We interact with each other. We laugh. We have fun. And that's just a space to interact with a mental health professional, to ask questions, and to get some practical support with just day-to-day issues. We've talked about suicide. We've talked about boundaries, control issues. We're going to be talking about how to make confident decisions. So these things that we're facing on a day-to-day basis, the parts of adulting that we hate, right, that makes it challenging, we tackle those things. So that's a great spot to stop by and check us out. I encourage people to go to our website, which is www.cultivated-hearts.com, to join our newsletter. So, when we have things going on, sometimes we do workshops, we do groups. We have a women's health group. We meet virtually on the first and third Wednesday of every month at 7:00. And we just talk about things that are impacting women in our ability to care for ourselves. And so it's a great way if you feel like you're struggling with taking care of yourself, you're struggling with whether it's losing weight, whether it's taking your vitamins, whether it's just wanting to make healthier decisions with your life. We have a great, great time in that space. So that's what's going on there. And then, like I mentioned earlier, I'm transitioning out of therapy. So I'm not taking any more clients there. But we do continue to create mental health services and experiences that help to increase our awareness of what's going on so we can make better decisions. You can't make a better decision if you don't know what those decisions are. And so we're very, very, very big supporters of mental health education. So joining our newsletter is the best place to go to make sure that you don't miss anything. But we like to be active. We post things all the time. You can go follow us on our social media, which is at _cultivated hearts. We're posting stuff all the time about all kinds of stuff. So those are some places where you will find us. We like to stay active, and we would love for any of the people that you interacted with to come stop by and hang out with us sometimes.
Absolutely. So there y'all have it there. It is www.cultivated-hearts.com.
Yep.
I will definitely have that in the show notes so that you guys have the links to her and be able to contact and connect with her. She is such a beautiful spirit. Thank y'all for tuning in to this week's episode of Mental Health, the New Wealth. And above all else, as you are doing your work every day on a regular basis to become a great, balanced human being, remember your mental health is the new wealth. We'll see you next week.